Not everyone who has your ambitions wants you to succeed. Dreams can serve as warnings. Lean in, chosen ones. For what I'm about to share will clear the fog from your mind and reveal that something extraordinarily wonderful has been going on behind your back. They spoke about more than simply you. They did more than only observe you. They had a vision of you. To be clear, they didn't see you on a daily basis. They witnessed your cosmic form, the one that causes the spirit world to hold its breath, and for evil forces to begin composing letters of resignation. Here's a fact. Dreams and visions were considered classified intelligence in many ancient societies, and they were so revered that rulers would call upon prophets to interpret them. Now consider how unprepared your adversaries were to witness your revelation up close. They're afraid after seeing a sight of your true self. To be honest, some of them likely attempted to use a Glade air freshener to spruce up their home in the hopes of changing what they observed. However, it's too late, because you can't be unseen once you're in the spirit. They understood they were facing a prophecy rather than a person when that vision showed them who you really were. Hold on tight, because I'm going to explain in detail what they witnessed, why it devastated them, and how your mere existence is the shocking conclusion to the story that they were not prepared for. First of all, although they saw you wrapped in light, it wasn't only kindness. It was power. They saw that you were glowing, but it wasn't the type of gentle, pleasant light they would have anticipated from someone of your caliber. A nice person glow was not what it was. There was weight to this light. It was authoritative. It shone without asking permission. It made no effort to make people feel at ease. It revealed stuff. It entered rooms and caused those with ulterior purposes to perspire. That was the thing that rocked them. They understood that you were someone who had been sent, not just a decent person attempting to live. You came to change the atmospheres without a word, not to fit in. They believed that you were quiet, restrained, and maybe even naive. However, they realized the reality in that vision. That light was energized, not gentle. There was no flicker. It was unfazed by intimidation. It stood as if it had authority over everything in its immediate vicinity, unconcerned. They realized then that you had clearance that they are unable to obtain. They are incapable of manipulation. You exude a spiritual power that they never thought was possible outside of temples or folklore. You are a verdict in your own right. That vision made it clear to them that they were dealing with someone who possessed God's signature on their person, not merely someone who prays or believes in God. That's not the same. They saw that you were carrying out a task rather than merely living your life. The source selected you. Civilization did not mold you. They at last realized that the reason you haven't retaliated against them in the manner they had anticipated isn't fear, but rather the fact that you have already triumphed in areas they are unable to enter. They saw that light, the type of light that comes to reclaim rather than to impress. It's strong, not lyrical. It demands capitulation. It requires no acclaim. They are unable to sleep as a result of realizing that the light was a warning and not a reflection. Second, their vision revealed the real you, concealed since birth, rather than a future you. The realization that you never changed was more terrifying than the fact that you had changed in your enemy's vision. It wasn't a glowing, changing future version of you that they saw. It wasn't the result of time, healing, or success. Beneath all the suffering, all the pretending, all the survival mode, it was an unadulterated, unfiltered version of you that has always been there. The picture they conjured up in their minds did not resemble the version of you they saw. You weren't damaged. You were not perplexed. You weren't little. You weren't lost. As you were born, you were standing in your complete spiritual identity. That's what shook them, because all of a sudden they had to face the reality that they were not harming someone weak. Rather, they were harming someone divine each time they attempted to degrade, manipulate, gaslight, or destroy you. They believed that your growth was external. They believed that you had to become something by living. However, that vision demonstrated to them that you were something from the start. The cover-up, the phony labels, and the warped versions they employed to manipulate you were all revealed by that vision. It tore off the disguise and exposed the real you, the one they were only close to and never had access to. And what's worst for them, they were seeing recognition, not only a spiritual upgrading. They knew who you were. They always felt, deep down, that you were unique and that you didn't fit into the categories they attempted to confine you to. But they disregarded it, attempted to minimize it, maybe even derided it. Now, in one heavenly flash, the knowledge hit them like a train. You were always superior to them. They were never ahead of you. They were always standing in the shadow of something timeless. And now they can't refute it. You exposed rather than became, and they are unable to ignore that. Third, the vision demonstrated that restraint was a tactic, but they believed you were helpless because you allowed them to triumph. Because you continued to let them win. They believed you were losing. That's why the image struck so strongly. It revealed to them the unexpected truth. You were perceptive, not defeated. You remained silent because you knew exactly what you were doing. When you left, when you remained silent while the falsehoods were being said, when you didn't respond to the setups, you understood what you were doing. You were simply playing a lot larger game than they ever realized, and you weren't out of moves. It was the plan, not simply your might, that shook them in that vision. They saw that each time you let anything go, each time you were attacked and didn't fight back, you were gathering information, allowing the trends to reveal themselves, and allowing individuals to be themselves without you having to speak. While they were squandering their energy trying to pull a response out of you, you were planning, waiting, and conserving yours. You were locked in spiritually rather than emotionally. They believed they were ahead. They saw your quiet as a sign of weakness. But they saw everything sideways in that holy epiphany. You were researching the field. You were never in their control. They were performing, and you were watching. With each move they made against you, you allowed them to set up their own trap. They finally understand. You allowed them to prevail in conflicts they were unaware were diversions. You were intent on purpose and not concerned in demonstrating anything. Since you had previously won in places they couldn't access, they could see you weren't responding. You were being precise, not being passive. And you already knew how the narrative ended, so it wasn't out of fear. They believed that defeating you was simple. When they chose to move with prudence, they realized that you were untouchable the entire time. They are being tormented by the idea that they never beat you and that they were only marching into the conclusion you had anticipated. Fourth, they were never supposed to read the scrolls that contained your name. Your name wasn't meant to be visible to them. They weren't meant to be aware of your true identity. However, something went wrong. A fissure appeared. A prohibited door was pushed just enough. They saw something that was never intended for them at that precise moment. Your name. It's not the one you sign, not the person you're called on the street. The authentic one, the one with the Spirit's mark, the one connected to spiritual contracts and past obligations that predate time itself. They gained access to areas they were not authorized to enter. Areas designated for soldiers carrying the burden of a holy calling, intercessors, and heavenly messengers. You don't find knowledge like that by accident. It's hardly a discovery on par with Google. This information was encoded, sealed, safeguarded, and kept secret until the designated moment. And they saw enough to shatter in a moment of spiritual transgression. They perceived your name encircled by authority, strength, and a long-standing promise. They read it in scrolls that aren't in this realm, manuscripts that are protected by creatures that don't toy with fate. They saw that you were connected to something more than this existence. All of their pettiness felt little all of a sudden. In light of what they witnessed, all of the rumors, deceit, and covert sabotage were pointless. It's what's making them crazy. It's spiritual overwhelm, not simply guilt. You can't unsee something heavenly once you've seen it. You cannot return to treating a chosen one as if they were just another person after you have identified them. They touched something precious without the proper equipment, leaving them reeling and spiritually confused. They saw enough to identify you, but not enough to avert what is about to happen. This is the part that really bothers them. They had consequences instead of control because of their viewpoint. A truth far above their level has been revealed to them, and all they believed they knew about you is now being revealed by that truth. Number 5. The vision revealed that they just knew the version of you that was used to deceive them, even if they believed they knew you. They were so sure they knew who you were. They believed they understood your personality, your flaws, and your tendencies. They believed that you were pinned. However, they were unaware, until the vision finally let them realize it, that the image of you they had been seeing all along was never the true you. While the real you worked in secret, managing affairs in realms they couldn't even identify. It was a decoy, a spiritual diversion, a disguise sent to safeguard your actual identity. The surface caused them to respond. The exterior shell served as the basis for their designs. And they took pride in it, making fun of you, undervaluing you, and acting as though you were something they could control or influence. However, they were able to see your true self when the curtain was lifted, even for a little moment. Not the tactful one, not the one that was too accommodative, nor the one who ignored the situation in order to maintain harmony. They witnessed the anointed person appending whole bondage bloodlines. They witnessed the person who embodies clarity in their quiet and fire in their DNA. They discovered, too late, that they were struggling with smoke while your true energy was tearing apart what they believed to be safe. You were disrupting cycles as they played mind games. The same heavenly energy that is going to destroy them from the ground up was building you while they were planning how to undermine your confidence. This view revealed not just your strength, but also their errors and blindness. It demonstrated to them that all of the pretexts for their attacks were false. The true you was never available to them. And now that they've seen the reality, they feel remorse rather than just terror. They squandered years battling a version of you that was never meant to win or lose, so they didn't simply undervalue you. Its sole purpose was to safeguard the actual danger. You. 6th, they understood that you were assigned to break a hereditary pattern that was helping them. The vision revealed your purpose for being here, in addition to who you are. And the reality was more profound than they had anticipated. They understood for the first time that you weren't assigned to fight them, make friends with them, or even blend in. You were dispatched to put a halt to something, namely a pattern of bloodlines that they were using to their advantage. It dawned on them then that your very existence was the judgment they had never anticipated. They had become accustomed to robbing others in cycles of manipulation that were handed down like heirlooms, control mechanisms that were encased in charm, supported by secrecy and shielded by silence. They believed that because certain patterns were accepted, they could not be changed. They were not questioned. They were revered by generations. However, when you arrived, your presence defied bowing. The game was not played by you. They weren't satisfied with your response. They now know why. You were sent as a spiritual disruption, the end of customs and practices that formerly flourished in the shadows. The shift might occur without the use of holy oil or speaking in tongues. Because your life, your light, and your insight are disruptive. All you had to do was exist. It challenges what other people have come to accept. And for that reason, which they do not completely understand, they despise you. The altars you were tasked with demolishing were inherited by them. You came to revoke the script, and they inherited roles that thrived on control. You weren't responding to their actions. Rather, you were answering an old task. They can now see it. They see that your opposition was heavenly rebellion, not rebellion, the sort that rewrites the definition of heritage and destroys generational covenants. They had a broader perspective because to that viewpoint, you were dangerous because of who you are, not because of anything you did. They didn't have to do anything to witness the devastation you inflicted. They saw the fall of a fortress that you were never able to enter. They were frightened because they realized they were dealing with prophecy rather than simply a human. Seventh, they were only tolerated, yet you are revered in the spirit realm. They were destroyed by that vision since it completely changed the narrative they had been holding to for so long. They behaved as though they were in charge and that people ought to be afraid of them, obey them, or submit to their might. They exuded a sense of spiritual majesty, anticipating that others would approach them with care or respect. However, the illusion broke when they stepped into that spiritual realm and witnessed the way the invisible world reacted to you. They witnessed heavenly entities, beings of fire, intelligence, and order, responding to you. It was as though you were one of them, not as though you were a visitor or fortunate to be there, as if you were working on a mission approved by heaven itself. There was no grudging regard. These were not coerced actions. These creatures didn't move for you. They moved with you. Honor like that is inherited, not asked for. And then they were crushed by its weight. You are valued where it matters, not only on earth and among like-minded individuals, but also in places where essence is the only language and ego is meaningless. Where their impact doesn't even register, they saw that your name has rank. They are tolerated in the spirit realm, not feared. Heaven is not impressed by their intensity, even if it may have intimidated others. The invisible doesn't care about their games, manipulation, or self-appointed position. You walk like a seal, though. You have a code on you. Your presence is subject to procedure. They are now aware of it. Everything they constructed was based on the false impression that they were strong, which is why they are in a downward spiral. But that vision was destroyed by what they witnessed. They were permitted, not feared. Furthermore, they were only able to function in some areas since you hadn't yet fully awakened yourself. They can't return to the armor of arrogance they formerly wore because they've seen what the spirit world already knows about you. They now understand that heaven travels with you wherever you move. And that type of respect cannot be faked by whatever they do. Number 8. They saw your eyes, and it was memory, not anger. It wasn't your anger that broke them in the vision. They were ready for that. They anticipated rage, wrath, and fire. However, they saw memory rather than anger in your eyes. Since that glance was about knowledge rather than feeling, it affected them more deeply than any scream or tantrum ever could. You were familiar with them from a previous existence as well as this one. Instead of the modified version, you saw the entire history. You recalled the betrayals they attempted to conceal, the clandestine agreements they forged, and the ancestral contracts they believed to be hidden in long-forgotten customs. You were standing there with awareness, not with pain. They were frightened by that gaze because it indicated that you had awakened, not just spiritually but also cosmically. You were a force that understood why it happened, who benefited, and what had to end as a result of it. Not a victim attempting to make sense of what had happened to you. You were the closure, not the one looking for it. You weren't shown striking out or seeking revenge in the vision. It would have been too simple for them to defend. Even worse, they witnessed their vulnerability in front of someone who was well-informed and didn't bat an eyelid. Because the person who remembers only needs to show up, not react. That haunting expression in your eyes was the composure of someone who has already moved past the judgment stage, not a desire for vengeance. It was the motionless arrival of a heavenly enforcer. As soon as they saw it, they realized that what had been remembered could not be undone. What has been exposed cannot be avoided. You are a spiritual reckoning in human form, not a survivor with a backstory. Furthermore, they went beyond the bounds of justice itself, not just with someone. Number 9. They at last realized that your suffering was an initiation rather than a loss. They always believed that your suffering was a sign of weakness, that you were brittle, distorted, or even shattered. Their favorite self-deception was that one. They labeled it defeat after pointing to your wounds, your silent times, and your tears. However, the vision brutally and honestly ripped through that preconception. They saw someone being tempered like steel in a fire. The type of fire that doesn't destroy but instead strengthens, reshapes, and sharpens, rather than someone who had been crushed by sorrow. Pain was your forge, not your enemy. Every moment they counted you out, every betrayal, and every grief was a hammer strike that made you into a weapon that no one could use. The vision showed them something they didn't want to acknowledge. You weren't broken, you were polished. To them, what appeared to be brokenness was instead holy conditioning. A heavenly process that reveals your inner strength by removing everything superfluous. You were never broken by them. They made an attempt, but all they succeeded in doing was forcing you to face your true self. That pain was never arbitrary or pointless. Rather, it was intentional, an introduction to a degree of fortitude and knowledge that few people are destined to attain. The more they assaulted, the more they formed you into something indestructible. They realized in that vision. They believed they were the ones who planned your demise. Thus this realization crushed their conceit. However, the vision revealed to them that they were only tools in your planning. The pain you went through was the source of your strength, not a weakness in your path. Your greatest strength was derived from the very thing that they utilized against you. They now understand that your suffering was never a loss, but rather the creation of a force that would rise above them, become more brilliant as a result of every hardship, and overthrow the very structures they formerly ruled. And that fact haunts them because it implies that all of the money they spent on destroying you simply made you invincible. Number 10. They realized they would never be welcomed after seeing the realms you control. They believed that their strength would be sufficient to pursue you through every door you unlocked and follow you wherever. But that illusion was torn apart by the image. It led them deep into areas they weren't authorized to tread, past the smoke and mirrors of power and prestige. These were places where control is gained via spiritual anointing, ancient rites, and holy alignment rather than by commotion or force. It was their recognition of their own exile from these places, not only your elevation, that frightened them. They witnessed the imperceptible lines, the gates that shut the instant they attempt to enter. They will never be given the same access, regardless of how closely they imitate your gestures or attempt to fake your enthusiasm. They resemble visitors attempting to enter a royal court without permission, where they will never be accepted. They learned from the vision that closeness does not equate to presence, and that the caretakers of these worlds are not fooled by their flimsy imitations. They realized then that their impact was always a shadow, a reflection of your true might. And their pride was shattered by that insight. In realms where their names don't exist, where their strategies fail, and where their power is meaningless, they witnessed you striding with authority. Their sense of exile was existential rather than merely spiritual. They are observers of your legacy as it develops and outsiders to your destiny. Because it's final, that understanding hurts more than any insult or assault. It is an indisputable fact that cannot be contested or denied. No matter how loud they yell or how clever their plans are, they will never be allowed to enter the regions you control. Additionally, that exclusion is the silent, unwavering defeat they now bear since they had a taste of what true power looks like, and it will always be out of their grasp. Number 11. Since they were the first to notice you, they were compelled to acknowledge that they attempted to destroy you. Their animosity was never sudden. It wasn't petty envy or arbitrary resentment. It was something far more profound, almost innate. Long before you fully realized your potential, and before anybody ever knew your name, they sensed you. Not in the same way that individuals sense the presence of another person, but rather in a manner that shook their whole being and made them realize something they couldn't ignore or control. That difference in you triggered an urgent and ancient alarm within of them. They were aware that you were a danger to the structures, the deceptions, and the authority they had established around themselves. You were not merely a visitor. So, before you could even comprehend who you were, they attempted to ruin you. Their attacks were intended to extinguish the light they perceived flickering inside of you, not only to cause you bodily or mental harm, because everything they relied on would be destroyed if you ever really blazed and ascended. They had to revisit that moment of realization because of the vision. They could clearly see themselves, the terror in their own eyes, the deliberate attacks intended to put out a wildfire before it began. It was an eerie mirror that displayed their shame in all its ugliness. They were frightened guardians attempting to secure an authority they had never earned, not merely adversaries. The tragic irony is that despite their efforts to bury, conceal, and eradicate it, it has come back to life. Their failure was replayed in that vision. It was their reckoning, not simply your narrative being told. The inexorable power they had seen long before and frantically attempted to extinguish had come to life, and they saw what they feared most. They now have to face that reality and acknowledge that their attacks were motivated by recognition rather than just hatred. They were doomed because they were the first to recognize you. Number 12. Until the vision revealed the ancient ones who protect you, they believed you were alone. They thought you were alone against the tide, alone and defenseless. Their biggest flaw was that misunderstanding, the brutal fact they had been oblivious to all along. That you're never alone was what the vision made clear to them. An invisible force is at work all around you, a silent army of ancestors and guardians from long ago. Their presence isn't signaled by loud noises or conspicuous indicators, but rather by subtle changes in the atmosphere and energy that only those who are properly attuned can sense. Your foes finally saw these bloodless guardians in that vision. The Watchers, guardians whose devotion is won by holy lineages and divine purpose rather than popularity or charisma, were seen by them from timelines and dimensions beyond their comprehension. They are sentinels of a council that watches over your purpose, protects your route, and steps in unexpectedly but always precisely. They are not only ghosts or echoes of the past. All of their preconceived notions about their strength and tactics abruptly fell apart. They were now up against an entire council, a multifaceted power that functions on a level considerably higher than intimidation or persuasion, rather than just one adversary. Their strikes were thwarted by this invisible protective web that encircled you rather than your might alone. Their pride was shattered by this realization, which left them distraught and frantically trying to change their strategy while constantly falling behind. They understood that they were fighting against a heritage, a lineage, and a holy order that was fiercely devoted to you. Their conflicts were not only physical or even spiritual in the traditional sense. They couldn't ignore the reality that the vision revealed to them. In order to defeat you, they would need to destroy an entire council of ancient power. They continue to lose as a result, because the actual war takes place in worlds where their presence is prohibited and where your guardians reign with unflinching vigilance, while they are focused on you. Number 13. Your fury appeared in the vision as quiet that destroys countries. There were no cries or explosions during the final, most awful moment of the vision. No rage was let go with a roaring sound. Rather, you remained still, collected, and serene. But it had a seismic effect. Because of you, whole kingdoms that were based on deception, terror, and control started to fall apart. That quiet was power in its purest form, not a lack of it. Your anger reorganized rather than roaring. They were aware of devastation, so they anticipated anger, fire, and mayhem from you. True rage, however, does not always scream, as the vision made clear. Sometimes it's a silent force that just lurks in the seams of systems and causes them to fall apart. Your anger is justified. It adheres to a greater order, a spiritual pattern that is audible without shouting. Instead of reacting out of rage or ego, it moves precisely, tearing down illusory kingdoms system by system and layer by layer. No war cry could have broken them more than that silence. They understood that you function on a higher plane where your sheer being upends corrupt systems. You don't get into little arguments or have emotional outbursts. You are a force of repair as well as destruction, destroying the rotten to create room for the genuine. Their presumptions about control and power were disproved by this discovery. They observed that being noisy is not a prerequisite for risk. You may be feared without being angry. Because your anger is in accordance with cosmic law and truth, it is calm, deliberate, and inexorable. They are left broken by the realization that realities don't just change when you relocate. They reconstruct under your direction, and they are unable to stop it. Number 14. What you stand for now haunts them, not their fear of you. Because they are afraid of you in the conventional sense, they are not haunted. There's something more sinister and profound. They are deeply shaken by the unquestionable reality of who you are, not by the danger of what you can do. You are now more than simply a person. You are a living symbol, a lighthouse of something old, something unadulterated and indisputable. As a spiritual royalty who isn't pleading for acceptance or waiting for authorization, you stand for the restoration of divine order. You serve as evidence that power is returning to its proper location and that the outdated control structures are collapsing. The knowledge that they were on the wrong side of history and that their time is done haunts them. You represent the reckoning they attempted to avoid, not merely upsetting their plans. They perceive in you the resurgence of a force that transcends human interests and refuses to compromise or accept partial facts. You are the unmistakable sign that a new age is dawning, one in which spiritual truth and legitimate authority take back their dominion. Because of this, their dread isn't a fear of conflict or reprisal, but rather the existential dread of confronting an uncontrollable future with someone like you at the forefront. You are more than simply their adversary. You are the warning that their delusions are coming to an end, and the truth is returning with overwhelming vigor. They're haunted because you're more than a passing fad or phase. You're a movement, an awakening that upends everything they've worked so hard to create. Because they know deep down that they are the problem, not simply you. They are unable to stop observing and responding. What they saw in that vision was not only a brief peek of who you are, it was an unavoidable encounter with a power that they were unable to contain or control. You are a living example of the force that destroys dysfunctional systems and rebuilds from the ashes. You are more than just a human surviving the craziness of this planet. They discovered your name written in secret scrolls, in locations that were only accessible to the anointed, domains they were never supposed to visit. They understood the profound mission you possess, dispelling lies, lifting curses from your lineage, and re-establishing a long-forgotten divine order. The deep understanding that you live on a plane above their grasp, surrounded by powerful, ancient, and sacred energies that protect and strengthen you, is what causes them to unravel, not just your acts. They were confronted with a reality that shatters their delusions. You are not only a challenge to their authority, you are the future taking back control, the unavoidable change that cannot be halted or resisted. These are not flaws. Rather, they represent the cornerstone of an unshakable legacy. the strength you have gained by suffering, the stillness of your anger, and the spiritual guidance protecting your path. For this reason, people are afraid of your mere existence rather than your rage. You represent a new paradigm, a return to real authority that doesn't need consent or validation. You are the heavenly majesty that governs beyond the visible realm and walks without a crown. The awakening they attempted to stifle. The shadow of the truth you bear is their fear. And even after their falsehoods have been exposed, that shadow will continue to haunt them. Thus, be steadfast in this knowledge. With each step you take, the Force rewrites history because you are the chosen one. The light you were born to radiate can be diminished by no vision, no assault, and no attempt to silence you. Your journey involves not just survival, but also simultaneous transformation, revolution, and restoration. And in doing so, you bear the promise of a new day, the hopes of the forgotten, and the fate of millions. Hold on tight. The future is yours, and the world is watching. Don't ignore this message if it resonated with you, or if it sparked an inner stirring. Join this group of enlightened individuals that will not accept anything less than the truth by clicking the subscribe button. To demonstrate your strength, like this video, your voice counts here, so please leave a comment below with your story or ideas. Above all, spread the word to people who need to hear it and who need to remember who they really are. Together, we're becoming the movement rather than only seeing it. Remain strong and prepared, and let's ascend. May you be blessed.